Hey everyone, today we're doing this long-awaited video. I'm going to share with you my process for cleaning the orchids that I acquired from another collection that had scales, mealybugs, and fusarium. Yeah, I know many of you are wondering when is this video about the orchid cleaning process coming. I've been a really busy bee. We took apart our old pergola and in the process of rebuilding a shade area for the orchids. It's been too hot though to work much, so I haven't gotten very far with that project. On another note though, we made a trip to San Diego and I can't wait to share with you a tour of Sunset Valley Orchids and some photos of San Diego Zoo, their orchid house and carnivorous plant greenhouse. About a month ago, I was gifted at least 75 orchids from William Youngblood's collection. If you haven't watched these two videos that lead up to our story today, you're welcome to check them out. I'll leave a link in the description below, two links actually, that will help you get caught up. The owner of these orchids died last summer, and a couple of years leading to his death, he had health issues. So these orchids did not receive his prime care for a few years now. We will have to foster these orchids back to health. Michelle was able to water twice a week after William passed away, so that kept them hydrated. I took the first trip at the end of April to bring 38 orchids back, and the second trip was mid-May, I believe. When I got home, after each haul, I watered everything to get them hydrated and to loosen the roots from the pots. I set them underneath the huge oak tree because it was so hot already, about mid-90s. I began unpotting in no particular order. I got the orchids out of the media that might be infested with bugs. Also, I knew that I would not be using clay pots because, for one, they're too heavy for my arthritic hands, and two, my orchids tend to get moldy and mildew in the clay pots. They don't dry fast enough for me. And third, I would not be able to move 10 orchids at a time in and out of my house this winter if they're in these clay pots. So these are just 3 out of the many reasons that I don't use clay pots. With 38 orchids to process, I didn't have much time to soak each one, and not every one of them needed soaking. I just sprayed a lot of them. Many did not have extensive root system, and they came right out of the pot easily. The physical cleaning included removal, whether it's foreign objects or unwanted waste, debris, or pests, and it included removing old media. So this was the first step for efficiency. The logic is that the less you have to clean, the faster you'll go. So who wants to clean an old pseudobulb that then we end up ripping it off to throw away anyway, right? Here's a good example of what I did to clean this particular large orchid. I was going much faster than this, but this one is for filming, and it's also the largest one. This one particular one had to be soaked, pot and all. It also had the worst infestation. This extra large plant tag was a really useful tool to pry the roots off of the pot safely. There were a lot of mealybugs inside the old sheath, so I pulled all the dead stuff off to expose the bugs and to clean each pseudobulbs. This orchid had mealybugs and scales for a long time. The yellow spots are where the mealybugs had harbored the leaves for a long time. I usually try to use my hand to break off and less tools to get dirty. Now I need to use the clippers to cut off the bloom spikes because it won't tear off nicely. More dead pieces that we need to tear off from here. I need to break off some more here where the old pseudobulb had blackened. It's nice though that the new growth has lots of good roots. I see signs of fusarium, unfortunately. I suspect that most of the orchids will have fusarium. So out of that large pot of orchid, we only end up with 2 small peas here. You can see the mealy bugs hiding in the crevices of the leaves. By the end of the first day, I have unpotted about half of the haul, and here are some examples of the issues I found. Here's a couple of pictures of the fusarium I found. Fusarium is a fungus and they multiply through spores, which is very lightweight and it blows around in the air very easily, so it's very contagious between plants. But many plants do survive and thrive with fusarium. It's not the end of the world. Sometimes we'll have to live with it. And here is a picture of a pseudobulb infected with scale. And then this one had a lot of blackened parts of the pseudobulb. You see a lot of the leaves serrated and looks chewed up. Well, Michelle said that a rat got into the greenhouse and chewed up a lot of the leaves. I guess it needed food and moisture, so it's seeking leaves for that. The next day was the same, more unpotting and ripping off the bad parts. I laid the bare root orchids on a couple of benches and kept the tags with it. When I found the copies of the same orchids, I just grouped the clumps together. I realized that it would be good to know what each name tag was first, because many of the orchids were repeated. I would have been able to sort first and then pulled and cleaned and grouped them together if they were the same. And it turned out that there were about 6 to 7 orchids that were the same. William liked to bury his tags deep. In fact, the entire tag would get buried. It was so deep that you would have to unpot the orchid to get to the tag. I would say about 40% didn't have any tags. The next step I did was cleaning with chemicals. I was hoping that this would address the microscopic systemic infections such as fusariums. I got a huge water bath and made a solution of Consan 20. I soaked about 20 orchids or so and then scrubbed each one with a cotton swab or a cotton pad to be disposed of after each orchid. I didn't like this process very much. After one day of using Consan 20, I abandoned this. I see a lot of warnings on Consan 20, and there was warning about the breathing fumes and any direct contact with the skin and issues with even bad for the environment on our water system. So I had to get rid of this part of the cleaning process. I continued the cleaning process by scrubbing off what I couldn't remove with my hands. I used the tweezers, the scrub pads, and a toothbrush. I went to a small container of very concentrated dish detergent. I use Ajax, I believe. I just changed the water about every couple of orchids. This was much safer, even if it doesn't get rid of more of the fungus that Consent 20 would have. I think my health was more important than the orchids, so. I used the tweezers to pull off parts of the sheath that I couldn't reach with my fingers or have a good grip. And I used the scrub pads to scrub off the sheath that still clung on to the pseudobulbs. And then to also scrub off any dirt that had built up on the pseudobulbs and the leaves over time. Also used the toothbrush to get in between the pseudobulbs and the rhizomes, and especially the tight crevices in the leaves. A lot of scales were found also in the leaves where the old bloom spikes had wilted away and have left over old material in the joints. Then I sprayed heavily with a hose to get rid of anything else that was still hanging on. The high power spraying on the hose was really effective, getting rid of fungus also on the surface. My next step was to spray hydrogen peroxide on all the plants generously. I worked on all 36 orchids. 2 are still in clay pots blooming, so I have not done those yet. Then I potted each one of the orchids. Some were combined. I was running out of pots. And I was lucky to have a cube of cocoa coir that I had gotten a few months ago to try out. This was the perfect thing to use since there was so much of it. It was really cheap too. I salvaged all the plastic pots I could find in the yard. And by the end of about 4 or 5 days or so, I was able to clean everything and potted all 36 orchids, working 4 hours a day or so. Then after the second trip in mid-May, I repeated the same process of cleaning 3 bucketfuls of orchids. So I had to be faster this time. And this time I had to burn some of the holes in the tags to attach to the plant, since there's so many more this time to keep up with. I pulled off as much media as I felt necessary. All would be good, but I have to negotiate with how much root I was willing to handle and probably damage. The more I worked with William's orchids, the more detail I got to know of William's growing habits. The details like burying his tags in multiple copies of the same orchids in the small clumps, and a layer of moss at the bottom of every pot. All of those details made me get to know him a little more. Now let's look at the orchids a month later. Some new growth and several bloom spikes. This encyclia bloomed last month, and this dendrobium is in bud right now. And best of all, this oncidium, my treasure find, is in spike. It's Miltassia Shaloptokian. Here I have a bundle of dendrobiums potted together, and a lot of the cattleyas had to be potted together to save pots. And these are the larger ones. I'll try to do a detailed update pot by pot one day. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this video, and I think that's all for this one. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.